The sound of distant thunder echoed across the plains as Ruby Calloway staggered down the dirt road leading into Sweetwater, Texas, one hand cradling her swollen belly, the other clutching a small burlap sack containing everything she owned in the world. Purple and yellow bruises mottled her legs below her tattered skirt, visible evidence of the life she was desperately trying to escape. It was 1875, and at 22 years old, Ruby had already known more pain than most endured in a lifetime. The spring sun beat down mercilessly as she approached the small frontier town. Her throat was parched, her feet blistered, but stopping wasn't an option. Not when Charles might be following. Not when the baby inside her could arrive any day now. Sweetwater was hardly more than a collection of weathered buildings straddling the stage-coach line. But to Ruby, it represented hope, a place where perhaps she could disappear, at least long enough to birth her child and figure out what came next. The town's lone saloon, the Rusty Spur, sat at the edge of town, its paint-peeled facade a welcome sight to Ruby's exhausted eyes. She needed water, perhaps work if anyone would hire a woman in her condition. Ruby smoothed her tangled auburn hair with trembling fingers and tried to straighten her dirt-stained dress before pushing open the saloon doors. The midday heat had driven several patrons inside, men who paused their card games and conversations to stare at the obviously pregnant woman who had just entered their domain. Ruby felt their eyes track her as she made her way to the bar, her legs trembling with each step. "Water, please," she managed to say to the bartender, a heavy-set man with a gray-streaked beard who regarded her with undisguised suspicion. "This ain't no charity house, madam," he replied, though he did slide a small glass of water toward her. Ruby fumbled in her sack for the few coins she had managed to take when she fled. "I can pay, and I was wondering, might there be any work available in town for a woman who can cook and clean?" The bartender's laugh was harsh. "In your condition, don't reckon so." A man at the far end of the bar cleared his throat. "Tom, that's no way to greet a lady in distress." Ruby turned to see a tall man with broad shoulders and sun-weathered skin rise from his seat. His dark brown hair was slightly too long, curling at the collar of his faded blue shirt. A well-worn Stetson sat on the bar beside him, and despite the relative safety of the indoors, Ruby noticed a holstered pistol at his hip. His eyes, a striking shade of blue that reminded her of the summer sky, assessed her with a frankness that somehow didn't feel invasive. "Name's Ryder Young, madam," he said with a slight nod. "Couldn't help but overhear. You look like you could use a proper meal and some rest." Ruby instinctively stepped back, one hand protectively covering her belly. "I'm not looking for charity, sir, just honest work." "Ain't charity I'm offering," Ryder replied. "I've got a small cattle operation north of town. Been looking for someone to help with cooking and keeping house since my housekeeper passed on last winter. Cabin's separate from the main house. You'd have your privacy." Ruby hesitated. A strange man offering work to a pregnant woman he'd just met seemed too good to be true, and in her experience, things that seemed too good to be true usually were. But the ache in her feet and the hunger gnawing at her stomach made the decision almost inevitable. "When would you need me to start?" she asked cautiously. "Right away, if you're able." Ryder studied her face, then dropped his gaze to the visible bruises on her legs. His expression hardened momentarily before returning to careful neutrality. "Wagon's out front. I can take you there now." Tom the bartender leaned across the counter. "Careful, Ryder, you don't know nothing about this woman." "I know she needs help," Ryder replied simply. "That's enough for today." Ruby drained her water, conflicted. Accepting help from a stranger was risky, but what choice did she have? The baby kicked inside her, a sharp reminder of her responsibility. Thank you, Mr. Young. I accept your offer at least until. She gestured vaguely at her swollen middle. Ryder nodded, collected his hat, and led the way outside to where a wagon stood hitched to two sturdy horses. He offered his hand to help her climb up, but Ruby managed on her own, determined to preserve what little independence she had left. As they pulled away from Sweetwater, Ruby cast a nervous glance back toward the road she had traveled that morning. There was no sign of pursuit, but that didn't mean Charles wasn't coming. He'd made it abundantly clear that she and the child she carried belonged to him. "Whoever you're running from," Ryder said quietly, eyes fixed on the trail ahead, "he won't find you at my place. It's remote enough." Ruby stiffened. "I didn't say I was running. Those bruises tell a story, madam. I ain't asking you to share it, just saying you're safe for now." The wagon rocked gently as they traveled, following a winding path away from town and deeper into the rolling Texas landscape. Ruby remained silent, one hand absently rubbing her belly as they passed stands of mesquite and scrub oak. After what seemed like hours but was probably only 40 minutes, they crested a small rise, and Ryder's ranch came into view. It wasn't large by Texas standards, a modest main house, a barn, some corrals, and a smaller cabin set a little distance away. A few hands were visible working with cattle in the distance. The place had a well-tended look that spoke of care rather than wealth. "It's not much," Ryder said, almost apologetically, "but it's mine. Been building it up for 5 years now." "It's lovely," Ruby said honestly, feeling a surprising sense of relief as they approached. "Have you always been a rancher?" "No, madam. Rode with the Texas Rangers after the war, then decided I preferred the company of cattle to most men." He guided the wagon toward the smaller cabin. "That there will be your place. Like I said, you'll have your privacy." The cabin was simple but clean, one main room with a small kitchen area, a table with 2 chairs, a bed against one wall, and a rocking chair near the fireplace. A door led to a tiny second room that held a smaller bed. "My old housekeeper, Mrs. Billings. She raised her grandson here after her daughter passed. Thought you might need the extra room soon enough." Ryder gestured to the smaller bedroom. Ruby felt tears spring to her eyes at this unexpected consideration. "Thank you, Mr. Young." "Ryder, please. We don't stand on ceremony out here." He cleared his throat. "I'll have one of the hands bring your meals from the main house until you're feeling up to cooking. You just rest today. Tomorrow's soon enough to talk about duties." After he left, Ruby sat in the rocking chair, overwhelmed by the sudden turn in her fortune. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to think that maybe, just maybe, she and her baby might have a chance. The fear remained, coiled tightly in her chest, but alongside it bloomed the tiniest seed of hope. The next morning, Ruby awoke to the sound of birds and distant cattle. For a moment, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, panic seized her. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back, and she relaxed against the pillows. A knock at the door startled her. Ruby quickly smoothed her hair and straightened her dress before answering. A young man, barely out of his teens, stood outside holding a covered tray. "Mornin', madam. Mr. Young asked me to bring you breakfast." "Thank you," Ruby said, accepting the tray, which held a plate of eggs, biscuits, and some sliced ham, along with a steaming cup of coffee. "I'm Teddy, madam. I help with the horses mostly." "Mr. Young said when you're feeling up to it, you can come over to the main house. He's out with the herd this morning but should be back by noon." After Teddy left, Ruby ate with relish, realizing how long it had been since she'd had a proper meal. The cabin, in daylight, revealed itself to be even more comfortable than she'd initially thought. Someone had stocked the small pantry with basic provisions, and there was a water pump just outside the door. By midday, Ruby had explored her new surroundings and was feeling restless enough to venture to the main house. The walk was short but taxing in her condition, and she was breathing heavily by the time she reached the porch. The main house was larger than her cabin but still modest by any standard, a typical ranch house with a wide porch wrapping around two sides. Ruby knocked hesitantly on the door. No answer came, and after waiting a few moments, she tried the handle. The door swung open to reveal a tidy but distinctly masculine living area, functional furniture, a few books on shelves, a rifle mounted above the fireplace. Evidence of a bachelor's existence was everywhere, from the single plate drying beside the sink to the lone pair of boots by the door. Ruby moved through the space, taking inventory of what would be her domain. The kitchen was well equipped but showed little use. She opened cupboards, mentally organizing what she would need to prepare meals for Ryder and his hands, making yourself at home. Ruby whirled around, one hand flying to her throat. Ryder stood in the doorway, hat in hand, regarding her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I'm sorry," she stammered. I wanted to see what I'd be working with. I didn't mean to intrude." Ryder's face softened. "No intrusion, Miss Calloway. This is your workplace now." He moved to the sink and poured himself a glass of water. "How are you finding the cabin?" "It's perfect, thank you. More than I expected." He nodded, seeming pleased. "Good. I have 4 hands who take most meals here, breakfast and supper. Lunch they usually handle themselves out on the range. I was thinking you could start tomorrow if you're feeling up to it." "I am," Ruby assured him, eager to earn her keep. "There's something else we should discuss." Ryder's tone turned serious. "Your condition. When is the baby due?" Ruby's hand went protectively to her belly. "Any day now, I think. I'm not entirely certain. There's a midwife in Sweetwater, Agnes Miller. I'll send word to her today that we might need her services soon." He hesitated. "Is there anyone else who should be notified? The baby's father, perhaps?" Ruby's face must have shown her fear because Ryder immediately raised his hands. "Forgive me, that's not my business." "No," Ruby said firmly. "There's no one, and I'd prefer it stay that way." Ryder studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Understood. No one from my ranch will speak of your presence here without your permission." Relief washed over Ruby. "Thank you." That evening, after returning to her cabin, Ruby sat in the rocking chair watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in hues of orange and pink. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel the baby's movements without dread, to imagine a future where they might both be safe. The next week fell into a routine that gave Ruby's life a structure she hadn't experienced in years. Each morning, she rose early to prepare breakfast for Ryder and his hands Teddy, Miguel, Old Joe, and a quiet man called Hawk, who was half Cherokee. The men were respectful, if curious about her presence, and accepted Ryder's terse explanation that she was their new cook and housekeeper without question. Ruby found the work satisfying, focusing on creating hearty meals from simple ingredients. Ryder seemed particularly appreciative, often complimenting her cooking with a quiet sincerity that made her cheeks warm. In the afternoons, when her swollen ankles demanded rest, Ruby would sit on the porch of her cabin, mending clothes or preparing vegetables for the next day's meals. Sometimes Ryder would stop by on his way to check the far pastures, bringing her wildflowers he claimed were for the table or bits of news from town. One such afternoon, about 10 days after her arrival, Ruby was shelling peas when Ryder approached on horseback. He dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle and came to sit on the porch steps. "Brought you something from town," he said, reaching into his saddlebag and producing a small package wrapped in brown paper. Ruby wiped her hands on her apron before accepting it. Inside was a length of soft, yellow fabric. "Thought you might want to make something for the baby," Ryder explained, looking slightly embarrassed. "My mother always said yellow was good luck for little ones." Ruby ran her fingers over the cotton, throat tight with emotion. "This is very kind, Ryder. Thank you," he shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Agnes Miller says she can come out next week to check on you, sooner if needed. I'd appreciate that." Ruby hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind for days. "Ryder, why are you helping me? You don't know anything about me." Ryder was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "My sister," he finally said. "She was in a situation similar to yours, I reckon. Married a man who turned out to be different than she thought, by the time I found out how bad it was." His jaw tightened. "Well, I was too late." Ruby's hand instinctively reached for his, resting briefly on his sun-bronzed skin. "I'm sorry." He nodded once sharply. "So when I saw those bruises on your legs, I figured maybe this time I wouldn't be too late." That night, long after darkness had fallen, Ruby awoke to a sharp pain radiating across her abdomen. She gasped, clutching her belly as realization dawned the baby was coming. Ruby tried to stand, intending to make her way to the main house for help, but another contraction hit, driving her back to the bed. She cried out, fear and pain mingling into a desperate sound that tore from her throat. Minutes later, or perhaps it was longer, time had become meaningless. Ruby heard pounding footsteps on the porch, then Ryder's voice calling her name. "In here," she managed to gasp as another contraction seized her. Ryder burst through the door, hair disheveled, wearing only trousers and an unbuttoned shirt. "The baby," Ruby nodded, sweat beading on her forehead. "It's coming." Ryder's face showed momentary panic before settling into determination. "I'll send Teddy for the midwife. Hawk's wife had babies. He'll know what to do until she gets here." Events blurred after that. Ruby was aware of movement around her, Hawk's calming presence, a woman's voice she didn't recognize, Ryder pacing outside on the porch. Pain consumed her world, wave after wave, as her body labored to bring new life into the world. Dawn was breaking when Ruby finally heard the cry, tiny, indignant, perfect. Tears streamed down her face as Agnes Miller placed a small bundle in her arms. "You have a son, Miss Calloway," the midwife announced. "A strong, healthy boy." Ruby gazed down at the red, scrunched face of her child. Despite the circumstances of his conception, despite the fear and pain that had accompanied her pregnancy, she felt nothing but overwhelming love. "Does he have a name?" Agnes asked gently. Ruby brushed a finger across the baby's cheek. "Samuel," she whispered. "Samuel James Calloway." After the midwife had cleaned up and assured herself that both mother and child were doing well, she left with a promise to return in a few days. Hawk and his wife departed too, leaving Ruby alone with her newborn son. A soft knock came at the door, and Ryder entered, his expression a mixture of concern and wonder. He approached the bed cautiously, as if afraid he might somehow disturb the miracle that had occurred. "You did it," he said softly, looking down at Samuel. "He's perfect." Ruby smiled tiredly. "Would you like to hold him?" Ryder looked startled, then nervous. "I've never held a baby before." "There's nothing to it," Ruby assured him. "Just support his head." With exquisite care, Ryder took the infant in his arms. His large, work-roughened hands seemed to dwarf the tiny body, yet he held Samuel with incredible gentleness. The baby yawned, his tiny fist escaping the swaddling to wave in the air. "Hello, Samuel," Ryder said, his voice softer than Ruby had ever heard it. "Welcome to the world." Something shifted in Ruby's heart as she watched this hardened cowboy cradle her son with such tenderness. It was too soon. too complicated to name the feeling, but it warmed her from within like a banked fire coming to life. The next few weeks passed in a haze of exhaustion and joy for Ruby. Samuel proved to be a relatively easy baby, content to sleep in the cradle Ryder had fashioned from an old wooden box, waking mainly to feed and be changed. Ruby gradually resumed her duties, bringing Samuel with her to the main house when she cooked. The ranch hands doted on the infant, each in his own way, Teddy making silly faces, Miguel singing Spanish lullabies, Old Joe carving a tiny wooden horse, and Hawk standing silent guard whenever Ruby needed to step away. But it was Ryder who surprised her most. He had no obligation to care about Samuel, yet he showed genuine interest in the baby's development, often asking to hold him while Ruby prepared dinner. There was something about seeing her son nestled against Ryder's broad chest that made Ruby's breath catch every time. One evening in late June, about a month after Samuel's birth, Ruby was sitting on the porch of the main house, nursing her son while waiting for the men to return for supper. The Texas heat was beginning to build toward summer's peak, but the porch caught the evening breeze, making it bearable. The sound of approaching horses made Ruby adjust her shawl for modesty. Ryder and the hands rode into the yard, dusty and tired from a day of mending fences in the south pasture. Ryder dismounted and handed his reins to Teddy, then climbed the porch steps, removing his hat as he approached. "How are my two favorite people this evening?" he asked, smiling at the sight of mother and child. Ruby returned his smile, a warm flutter in her chest at his casual inclusion of her and Samuel as his people. "We're well. Samuel's been a perfect angel today." Ryder settled into the chair beside her, stretching his long legs out before him. "Good to hear. I've been thinking, Ruby." The serious note in his voice made her glance up sharply. "Yes, you and Samuel, you're welcome to stay here as long as you want. I hope you know that." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you. I don't know where we would go otherwise." Ryder was silent for a moment, his fingers toying with the brim of his hat. "There's something else. Hawk was in town yesterday. He overheard some talk about a man asking questions. A man looking for his wife who ran off while carrying his child." Fear seized Ruby's heart. "Charles," she whispered. "He's looking for me." "That your husband?" Ryder asked, his voice carefully neutral. Ruby nodded, swallowing hard. "We married when I was 18. He was charming at first, then changed. When I told him I was with child, things got worse. He said no child of his would be raised by a woman like me." She shuddered at the memory. "The night I ran, he'd been drinking. The beating was worse than usual. I feared for the baby, for my life." Ryder's hands tightened on his hat until his knuckles whitened. "Did he come looking here in Sweetwater specifically?" "I don't know. I didn't plan to come here when I fled. I just took what money I could find and ran. The stagecoach dropped me off, and I couldn't afford to go further." Hawk didn't get the man's name, just his description. "Tall, well-dressed, with a beard. That sound like him." Ruby nodded, instinctively drawing Samuel closer. "What if he finds us?" Ryder's eyes hardened. "He won't. But if he comes looking, he'll have to go through me first." The protectiveness in his voice should have comforted Ruby, but it only heightened her anxiety. "I can't let you put yourself at risk for us, Ryder. If Charles finds out I'm here, he'll be dangerous." "Ruby, look at me." Ryder's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm not afraid of men like him. I've faced worse in my time with the Rangers." "It's not just about physical danger," Ruby protested. "Charles has connections with law enforcement, with judges. He could make legal trouble for you, claim you've harbored his wife illegally. Let him try." Ryder reached out, hesitated, then covered her hand with his. "I'm not sending you and Samuel away, Ruby. Not unless that's what you want." The touch of his hand sent warmth spreading up her arm. "We want to stay," she admitted softly, but I need to be realistic about the danger. That night, after putting Samuel to bed, Ruby stood at the small window of her cabin, gazing out at the star-filled Texas sky. The peace she had begun to feel in recent weeks was tainted now by the specter of Charles's pursuit. Even here, miles from anywhere, she couldn't escape the fear that he would find them. A soft knock at the door made her jump. Ruby reached for the small revolver Ryder had given her the previous week, insisting she learn to use it for protection when he couldn't be nearby. "Who is it?" she called, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's me, Ruby." Ryder's voice was instantly recognizable. She opened the door to find him standing there, a concerned expression on his face. "I saw your light was still on. Thought you might be worrying." Ruby stepped back to let him in, suddenly aware she was wearing only her nightdress with a shawl hastily thrown over her shoulders. "I was just checking on Samuel." Ryder glanced toward the second room where the baby slept. "Is he all right?" "Yes, sleeping soundly." Ruby wrapped her arms around herself. "I can't stop thinking about what you told me earlier, about Charles asking questions in town." Ryder moved to the fireplace, stoking the dying embers back to life. "I've been thinking about it too. There might be a way to make you and Samuel safer, legally speaking." "How?" Ruby asked, hope flaring briefly. "If you had a husband, your former one would have less claim on you, especially since you left him due to violence." Ruby stared at him, uncomprehending for a moment. "Are you suggesting I find someone to marry?" Ryder straightened, meeting her gaze directly. "I'm suggesting you marry me." The words hung in the air between them. Ruby's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. Ryder, that's madness. We barely know each other." "I know you're kind and brave. I know you're a wonderful mother. I know you make the best apple pie I've ever tasted." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "What else do I need to know? Why would you do this?" Ruby whispered. "Take on another man's wife, another man's child." Ryder took a step closer. "Samuel feels like mine already," he admitted. "And as for you—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I care for you, Ruby, more than I expected to, more than might be proper given your situation." Ruby felt tears spring to her eyes. "I can't ask you to sacrifice your future for us. It's not a sacrifice if it's what I want." He reached out, gently brushing a tear from her cheek. "Think about it. That's all I ask." After he left, Ruby sat by the fire until it burned down to embers, turning Ryder's proposal over in her mind. Marriage had brought her nothing but pain before. Yet the thought of being Ryder's wife stirred something deep within her, something that felt dangerously like hope. The next morning, Ruby went about her duties with Samuel strapped to her chest in a sling Hawk's wife had shown her how to make. She was kneading bread dough when Ryder entered the kitchen, his expression cautious. "Good morning," he said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Sleep well," Ruby smiled despite herself. "Not particularly. Someone gave me a lot to think about." "I'm sorry if I overstepped," Ryder began, but Ruby shook her head. "You didn't. Your offer was generous and unexpected." "But," Ryder prompted, sensing her hesitation. Ruby wiped flour from her hands. "But marriage should be more than a practical arrangement, shouldn't it? Especially a second marriage. I'd want it to be for the right reasons." "And what reasons would those be?" Ryder asked softly. Ruby met his gaze. "Love, I suppose, mutual respect, genuine affection. And you don't think we could have those things?" There was a vulnerability in Ryder's eyes that made Ruby's heart ache. "I think we might," she admitted. "In time, but rushing into marriage because of fear doesn't seem wise." Ryder nodded slowly. "Fair enough. The offer stands regardless. No pressure, no expectations." Before Ruby could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Ryder moved to the window, his body tensing as he looked out. "Who is it?" Ruby asked, sudden fear gripping her. "Stay inside," Ryder ordered, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip as he strode toward the door. Ruby clutched Samuel closer, heart pounding as she watched through the window. 3 riders had entered the yard, none of them Ryder's hands, who were all out working the cattle. The man in front was expensively dressed in a dark suit despite the heat, his beard neatly trimmed, his bearing confident to the point of arrogance. Even at this distance, Ruby recognized him immediately. Charles had found her. Ryder stood on the porch, his stance deceptively casual, though Ruby could see the tension in his shoulders. She couldn't hear the exchange, but she saw Charles gesture emphatically, pointing toward the house. Ryder shook his head, his hand never straying far from his pistol. The confrontation seemed to escalate, Charles's face flushing with anger as he dismounted and took a step toward the porch. Ryder didn't move, a solid barrier between Charles and the house where Ruby stood frozen in terror. One of the men accompanying Charles, who Ruby now recognized as the sheriff from their hometown, placed a restraining hand on Charles's arm. More words were exchanged, and then, to Ruby's immense relief, Charles remounted his horse. The 3 men turned and rode back the way they had come, though not before Charles cast one last venomous glance toward the house. Ruby was trembling when Ryder returned inside, his face grim. "That was him, wasn't it? Your husband?" She nodded, unable to speak past the fear constricting her throat. "He claims you stole money from him when you left, says the baby is his, and he has a right to his son." Ryder's voice was tightly controlled. "Brought the sheriff from your hometown to try to intimidate me." "What did you tell them?" Ruby whispered. "That I hadn't seen any woman matching your description." Ryder's mouth set in a hard line. "The sheriff seemed ready to search the place, but I reminded him he has no jurisdiction here. They're going to talk to Sheriff Davis in Sweetwater next, I reckon." "He'll find us," Ruby said, despair washing over her. "Charles never gives up when he wants something." "He won't find you," Ryder assured her. "I sent Teddy to town at first light this morning to speak with Sheriff Davis. He's a good man and he owes me a favor. He'll stall them at least." Ruby swayed on her feet, the room suddenly spinning around her. Ryder was at her side instantly, guiding her to a chair. "Ruby, listen to me," he said urgently. "I won't let him take you or Samuel, I swear it." She looked up into his face, saw the determination there, and something in her broke. The tears she'd been holding back flooded forth. "I'm so tired of being afraid, Ryder." He knelt before her, taking her free hand in his. "Then let me help you stop being afraid. Marry me, Ruby. Not someday, not when we're sure of our feelings. Now, today." Through her tears, Ruby studied his face, the strong line of his jaw, the tiny scar above his right eyebrow, the earnest blue eyes that had shown her nothing but kindness since the moment they met. "Yes," she said simply. "I'll marry you." The relief that washed over Ryder's face was almost palpable. "You're sure?" Ruby nodded. "I trust you, Ryder. That's enough to start with." Within the hour, Ryder had dispatched Hawk to find the circuit preacher who occasionally visited the ranches in the area. By a stroke of fortune, Reverend Williams was staying at a neighboring ranch only a few miles away and arrived by mid-afternoon. The ceremony took place on the porch of the main house, with Ryder's hands as witnesses. Ruby wore her best dress, the only one without patches, with wildflowers Teddy had hastily gathered tucked into her hair. Samuel, wrapped in the yellow blanket Ruby had made from the fabric Ryder gave her, slept peacefully in Miguel's arms throughout the brief ceremony. "Do you, Ryder James Young, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Reverend Williams intoned. Ryder's eyes never left Ruby's face. "I do." "And do you, Ruby Ann Calloway, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Ruby took a deep breath. "I do." "Then by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." The Reverend smiled. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Young." Ryder hesitated, clearly unsure how Ruby would feel about this public display. She solved his dilemma by rising onto her tiptoes and placing a gentle kiss on his lips there first. It was brief, but stirred something unexpected within her, a fluttering warmth that had nothing to do with practicality or protection. That evening, after a celebratory supper during which old Joe broke out his fiddle and played dancing tunes, until Samuel's startled cries put an end to the revelry, Ruby found herself facing a new dilemma. As Ryder's wife, she should rightly move into the main house, into his bedroom. The thought filled her with nervous anticipation. Ryder seemed to sense her uncertainty as they stood on the porch, watching the hands retire to their bunkhouse. "I've had Teddy move your things to the main house," he said. "But Ruby, I want you to know I expect nothing from this marriage that you're not ready to give." Relief and something like disappointment mingled in Ruby's chest. "You're a good man, Ryder Young," he smiled, the moonlight casting shadows across his face. "I'm trying to be the man you deserve." The next morning, Ruby woke early, momentarily disoriented by her new surroundings. She had slept in the main bedroom while Ryder had insisted on taking the small guest room. Samuel's cradle stood beside her bed, the baby still sleeping soundly. She rose and dressed quietly, then made her way to the kitchen, determined to prepare a special breakfast for her new husband. She was just taking biscuits from the oven when Ryder appeared, hair damp from washing, wearing a clean shirt that brought out the blue of his eyes. "Good morning, Mrs. Young," he said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The name sent a pleasant shock through Ruby. "Good morning, Mr. Young," she replied, returning his smile. They were just sitting down to eat when the sound of horses approaching at speed drew Ryder to his feet, hand automatically reaching for his pistol. "Stay inside," he ordered, moving to the window. His expression darkened. "It's Sheriff Davis from Sweetwater, and your husband is with him." Ruby's hands trembled as she lifted Samuel from his cradle, holding him protectively against her chest. "What do? We face them," Ryder said firmly. "Together, as husband and wife." They stepped onto the porch as the Ryders entered the yard. Charles dismounted first, his face twisted with rage when he spotted Ruby with the baby. "There she is," he shouted, pointing. "I told you she was here, Sheriff. That's my wife and my son." Sheriff Davis, a weathered man with a gray mustache, remained on his horse, his expression neutral. "Madam, this man claims you're his wife, Ruby Calloway. Says you stole money from him and ran off with his unborn child." Before Ruby could respond, Ryder stepped forward. "Sheriff, this is my wife, Ruby Young. We were married yesterday by Reverend Williams. I have the marriage certificate right here." He produced a paper from his shirt pocket. Charles's face purpled. "That's impossible. She's already married to me, Ruby." Sheriff Davis looked at her expectantly. Ruby swallowed hard, finding strength in Ryder's solid presence beside her. "I was married to Charles Blackwood," she acknowledged, "but I left him because he beat me regularly. The last time, I feared for my life and my unborn child's. I took only what money was rightfully mine, my inheritance from my grandmother that he had been controlling." Sheriff Davis studied her, noting the fading but still visible bruises on her legs. "And the wedding yesterday, was that of your own free will, madam?" "Yes," Ruby said firmly. "I chose to marry Ryder Young of my own free will." Charles lunged forward suddenly. "You lying whore, that's my son. Give him to me." Ryder moved faster than Ruby would have thought possible, placing himself between Charles and Ruby. In one fluid motion, he drew his pistol and pointed it steadily at Charles's chest. "Take one more step toward my wife and son, and it'll be your last," Ryder said, his voice dangerously quiet. Sheriff Davis dismounted, his own hand moving to his gun. Easy now, Young. Let's not have bloodshed. Tell him to back away from my family, Ryder replied, never taking his eyes off Charles. Blackwood, back up, the sheriff ordered. Now, Charles's face contorted with fury, but he took a step back. She has no right to my son. The law says a lot of things, Sheriff Davis interrupted, including that a woman can leave a man who abuses her, and since she's legally married to Young now, the situation has changed. I'll challenge it in court, Charles snarled. I'll take everything you have, Young. You're welcome to try, Ryder replied calmly. But you should know that Judge Harrington in Austin is my second cousin, and he takes a particularly dim view of men who beat women. Charles looked from Ryder to the sheriff, seeming to realize he was outmaneuvered for the moment. This isn't over, he warned, backing toward his horse. Yes, it is, Sheriff Davis said firmly. Mrs. Young has made her choice clear. I suggest you return to wherever you came from, Mr. Blackwood. After Charles and his companions had ridden away, Sheriff Davis lingered for a moment. Young, you sure about all this? Taking on another man's wife and child, Ryder's arm slipped around Ruby's waist. They're my family now, Sheriff. I've never been more sure of anything. The sheriff nodded, touching the brim of his hat. Fair enough, but watch your back. Men like Blackwood don't give up easily. As the sheriff rode away, Ruby turned to Ryder, emotion overwhelming her. Thank you, she whispered, leaning against his chest. I don't know how I'll ever repay you for what you've done. Ryder's hand came up to stroke her hair. There's nothing to repay, Ruby. I meant what I said. You and Samuel are my family now. The weeks that followed were tense at first, everyone on the ranch watching for Charles's return. Ryder doubled the night watch and made sure Ruby was never alone when he had to ride out to check the far pastures. But as July turned to August with no sign of Charles, they began to believe he might have given up his pursuit. Life settled into a new rhythm for Ruby. She moved fully into the main house, sharing the master bedroom with Ryder, though he continued to sleep in the small guest room. Samuel thrived, growing plumper by the day, his eyes, which had been blue at birth, darkening to a rich brown that resembled neither Ruby's green nor Charles's pale gray. It was as if the baby was deliberately shedding any resemblance to the man who had fathered him. One evening in late August, Ruby was sitting on the porch, watching Ryder teach Teddy how to properly break a young horse in the corral. Samuel lay on a blanket beside her, kicking his legs and cooing at the clouds overhead. The late summer heat was beginning to wane, and the evening air was pleasantly warm. Ruby found her gaze lingering on Ryder, the way his shoulders moved beneath his shirt, the patient manner in which he instructed Teddy, the gentle hands that could be so firm with a spirited horse, yet so tender with her son. Over the past weeks, she had come to rely on his steady presence, to look forward to their conversations over supper, to value his opinions and insights. She was falling in love with her husband, Ruby realized with a start. The thought should have frightened her, given her experience with Charles, but instead it filled her with a quiet joy. That night, after Samuel had been fed and put to bed in his cradle, Ruby found Ryder sitting at the kitchen table, looking over the ranch accounts by lamplight. "Ryder," she said softly, "may I speak with you?" He looked up, immediately setting aside his work. "Of course. Is something wrong?" Ruby shook her head, taking the seat across from him. "No, nothing's wrong. I wanted to thank you for everything you've done for Samuel and me." Ryder smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "You don't need to keep thanking me, Ruby. There's something else." Ruby gathered her courage. "When we married, you said you expected nothing from me that I wasn't ready to give." "I meant it," Ryder assured her. "I know you did. But what if I am ready to be a true wife to you?" The words came out in a rush, and Ruby felt heat rise to her cheeks. Ryder went very still, his eyes searching her face. Ruby, are you sure? I don't want you to feel obligated because of what I've done. It's not obligation, she said softly. It's because over these past weeks, I've come to care for you. More than care, if I'm being honest. Ryder reached across the table, taking her hand in his. I've loved you since the moment I saw you standing in that saloon, he confessed. But I never wanted to press you, never wanted you to feel trapped again. I don't feel trapped with you, Ryder. I feel safe. I feel cherished. The look in his eyes as he rose and came around the table made Ruby's heart race. He knelt beside her chair, one hand gently cupping her cheek. May I kiss you, Mrs. Young? Properly this time. Ruby nodded, and Ryder's lips met hers in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened, awakening feelings Ruby had thought long dead after her years with Charles. When they finally parted, both were breathless. I love you, Ruby Young, Ryder whispered against her hair. You and that boy of ours. And we love you, Ruby replied, realizing the truth of it in her bones. That night, for the first time, they shared the master bedroom as husband and wife in every sense. Autumn came to Texas, bringing cooler days and the satisfaction of a successful cattle drive to the railhead in Kansas. Ryder returned with news that the beef prices had been good, ensuring the ranch's prosperity for another year. He also brought presents: a silver locket for Ruby with space for a tiny portrait, and a handcrafted rocking horse for Samuel, who at 5 months old was not yet ready for it but delighted in the colorful painted mane nonetheless. Ruby had news of her own. 2 weeks after Ryder's return, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, she placed his hand on her still flat stomach. I think our family might be growing again, she whispered. Ryder's sharp intake of breath was followed by a kiss that left no doubt of his joy at the prospect. Are you certain? Nearly. Agnes confirmed it yesterday when she came to check on Samuel's cough. Ruby's voice held a note of wonder. She thinks the baby will come in late spring. A spring baby, Ryder mused, his hand gentle on her abdomen. Perfect timing when everything's new and green. Are you happy? Ruby asked, a hint of anxiety in her voice. Ryder gathered her close. I'm happier than I ever thought possible, Ruby. You've given me everything I never knew I wanted: a wife, a son, and now another little one on the way. As winter settled over the Texas plains, bringing occasional ice storms and long, cozy evenings by the fire, Ruby reflected on the remarkable turn her life had taken in less than a year. From desperate flight to unexpected sanctuary, from fearful mother-to-be to beloved wife, from lonely survivor to the heart of a growing family, the journey still seemed miraculous to her. Samuel, now 8 months old and crawling everywhere, had begun to pull himself up on furniture, babbling "Mama" and "Dada" with equal enthusiasm. The latter had brought tears to Ryder's eyes the first time he heard it, though he tried to hide them behind a cough. Christmas approached, and Ruby threw herself into preparations, determined to make it special. She baked cookies with cinnamon and ginger, hung wreaths of cedar on the doors, and worked secretly on gifts when Samuel napped a new shirt for Ryder, hand-knitted socks for the ranch hands, a soft toy rabbit for her son. On Christmas Eve, after a festive supper with the Hands, who had contributed a wild turkey and a jug of potent homebrew to the celebration, Ruby and Ryder sat before the fire in the main house, Samuel asleep on a blanket nearby. I have something for you, Ryder said, producing a small package from behind his back. I know we said we'd exchange gifts tomorrow, but this one couldn't wait. Ruby unwrapped it to find a small leather-bound book. Opening it, she discovered it was filled with official-looking documents. What is this? She asked, puzzled. Read the top page, Ryder urged. Ruby scanned the legal text, her eyes widening as understanding dawned. This is adoption papers For Samuel, Ryder nodded. I spoke with Judge Harrington when I was in Austin last month. He helped expedite the process. Charles Blackwood has officially relinquished all claims to Samuel for a price, of course, the greedy bastard, and I've legally adopted him as my son. He hesitated. If that's what you want, of course. Tears filled Ruby's eyes. Oh, Ryder, there's nothing I want more. But how did you convince Charles to agree? Let's just say I made it clear that pursuing his claim would cost him more than he'd gain. Ryder's expression was grim for a moment. The man's a coward at heart. Once he realized he was outmatched, he was happy to take the money and disappear. Ruby set the papers aside and threw her arms around her husband's neck. Samuel James Young, she murmured. It sounds perfect. Ryder held her close, one hand drifting to the slight curve of her belly where their second child grew. I thought so too. Spring arrived in a riot of wildflowers, painting the Texas landscape in blues, yellows, and reds. Samuel, now a year old, toddled unsteadily among the bluebonnets that carpeted the ranch's south pasture, squealing with delight whenever a butterfly fluttered past. Ruby, heavy with child, watched from a blanket spread beneath an old oak tree, her back supported by a saddle Ryder had positioned as a makeshift cushion. At 9 months pregnant, she found movement increasingly difficult, but refused to be confined to the house on such a beautiful April day. Ryder sprawled beside her, one hand absently stroking her swollen belly. He's active today, he remarked as the baby kicked against his palm. Ruby corrected with a smile. Agnes is convinced it's a girl this time. Boy or girl doesn't matter to me, Ryder said. As long as the little one is healthy and you come through the birth safely. Ruby covered his hand with hers. I will. Agnes says everything looks perfect. The midwife had become a regular visitor to the ranch as Ruby's due date approached, checking on her progress and helping prepare for the birth. Unlike with Samuel, when fear and uncertainty had clouded the experience, Ruby felt only excitement and anticipation this time. 2 nights later, Ruby woke to the now familiar sensation of her womb contracting. She touched Ryder's shoulder gently. It's time, she whispered. Unlike the panicked rush of Samuel's birth, this labor progressed with measured certainty. Ryder sent Teddy for Agnes while Hawk's wife came to care for Samuel, who slept through the commotion. By dawn, Ruby was holding her daughter in her arms, a tiny, perfect girl with a dusting of dark hair and her father's blue eyes. She's beautiful, Ryder breathed, perched on the edge of the bed, one finger caught in his daughter's surprisingly strong grip. Just like her mother. Ruby smiled tiredly. What shall we call her? They had discussed names but hadn't settled on one, wanting to see the baby first. Elizabeth, Ryder suggested. After my mother, Elizabeth Rose Young, Ruby added. Rose was my mother's name. It's perfect. Ryder leaned down to kiss first his daughter's forehead, then his wife's lips. You're perfect, all of you. As spring turned to summer, the Young family settled into a new rhythm. Samuel was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to touch her hair or hold her hand, while Ruby and Ryder adjusted to the challenges of parenting 2 children under 2 years old. The ranch prospered, with Ryder adding a new section of land to the west and increasing his herd. Ruby's garden flourished, providing vegetables for their table and flowers for the house. On Sundays, they often rode into Sweetwater for church services, Ruby proudly introducing Elizabeth to the townspeople who had come to accept her as one of their own. There were still occasional whispers about her past, the pregnant stranger Ryder Young had taken in and married, but Ruby no longer let such talk trouble her. Her life was here now, her family secure in Ryder's love and protection. One evening in early September, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, 4-month-old Elizabeth sleeping in Ruby's arms and Samuel playing with wooden blocks at their feet. Ryder turned to his wife with an expression she had come to recognize as his, thinking about the future look. "I've been considering expanding the house," he said. "Adding a proper nursery for the children, maybe another bedroom or two." Ruby raised an eyebrow. "Planning on more children already, Mr. Young?" Ryder grinned, unabashed. "Well, I do come from a family of 5. Seems a shame to stop at just 2. Ruby laughed softly, careful not to wake Elizabeth. "Perhaps we should wait until this one is sleeping through the night before we plan the next." "Fair enough." Ryder stretched, his arm coming to rest around Ruby's shoulders. "But the house expansion is still a good idea. It was built for a bachelor, not a family." "A family," Ruby echoed, the word still sometimes catching her by surprise. 2 years ago, she had been trapped in a nightmare, enduring Charles's cruelty while trying to protect her unborn child. Now she sat beside a man who cherished her, with 2 beautiful children and a home filled with love. "What are you thinking about?" Ryder asked, noting her thoughtful expression. "Just how fortunate I am," Ruby replied. "How one moment of courage changed everything." Ryder's arm tightened around her. "The courage was all yours, Ruby, walking into Sweetwater alone, pregnant and bruised, not knowing what you'd find. And finding you," she said softly. "The best thing that could have happened. For both of us," Ryder agreed. "For all of us." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Ruby leaned her head against her husband's shoulder, content in the knowledge that the man who had once hurt her was now just a distant memory. The cowboy who had taken her far from danger had become the center of a world she once could only dream of, a world built on kindness, respect, and love that grew stronger with each passing day. Samuel looked up from his blocks, offering one to Ryder with a grin that displayed his newly acquired teeth. "Dada, look!" Ryder leaned down to accept the block, ruffling his son's hair. "That's a fine tower you're building there, partner." Ruby watched them, her heart full. Elizabeth stirred against her chest, tiny fingers flexing in sleep. This was her family, not bound by blood but by choice, by love, by the courage to reach for something better. The Texas dusk deepened around them, stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: horses to train, cattle to tend, children to nurture. But tonight, on this porch, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. "I love you," Ruby whispered to her husband. Ryder's eyes, reflecting the last light of day, met hers with a tenderness that still took her breath away. "And I love you, Mrs. Young, now and always." As if in agreement, a shooting star blazed across the sky, a fleeting moment of brightness that seemed to Ruby a perfect symbol of the life she had found. Unexpected, beautiful, and worth every risk she had taken to reach it.